Hellbent discovered his secret very early on in life. It all started when he was a kid. His mother cooked him beans for dinner one night and his stomach swelled. That night in bed, he couldn't stop farting, but worse than that, he discovered he really liked the smell of his own farts. Whenever his butt trumpet would blast, he would curl up under the covers and smell his bodily fragrances. He enjoyed nothing more than wafting his farts at night when no one else was around. Not even slightly gross.
When Nixium was in school, he liked the girl but hated her friends, who were mean. One day, for no reason, the girl stood up for Nixium and told off her friends when they were making fun of him. After that, they started talking on an app on their phones for several months. When he finally asked her out, she said, "Only if you run into the sign on the field and say, 'It's for Team Spirit.'" Of course, being the hormone-filled teen he was, Nixium said he would do it and ran into the sign. While the principal was giving a speech, worst of all was that the principal was right in front of the sign when he ran into it. Nixium hit the sign and then saw black. When he woke up, he was in the nurse's office with the principal, his mom, and the girl at his side. Although he ended up getting a concussion, Nixium and the girl dated for 2 months, but then broke up with her because she was too clingy.
Pandora went to a house party once that was so boring, she got really drunk just for the entertainment. Unfortunately, she became so intoxicated that she became incredibly lewd. She walked up to her door and yelled,
"What's up, sexy?"
at the top of her lungs. She then whispered sexual things to the door and started making out with it. She doesn't remember much after that. In the morning, she felt really bad for that door. Must have felt very violated.
Melissa worked as a professional foot fetish model for a whole year. Every session, she went to a public park where she was photographed stomping on things, getting her feet tickled, and squishing things between her toes. Melissa found this a little strange since she didn't have a foot fetish herself, but it was definitely the easiest money she ever made. One time, Zaraganba got really shit-faced at a school reunion. When it was over, he went back to his hotel but couldn't get inside his room. In drunken frustration, he kicked down the door and spent the night sleeping in a cupboard. The next morning, he was woken up by a total stranger and some very angry hotel staff. It turns out the room he'd forced his way into wasn't his room. It was a stranger's. To make matters worse, he'd also thrown up all over their floor. Thinking back on that night, Zaraganba admits that he was a terrible person.
Sweet Commando was 10. He was in a math class taking a test. It was completely silent, like ears ringing, hearing the pen drop on carpet silent. At one point, his stomach started cramping and gurgling, and he felt as if he had diarrhea. Then, it happened. In the dead, silent room, Sweet Commando let out the loudest fart of his life. Another teacher even came into the room to see who had snuck in the tuba. It was definitely not his grandest moment.
The first con that Gurgak ever went to was A-Con when he was 14. His dad told him to stay with him, but being a 14-year-old, Gurgak didn't listen. While Gurgak walked around looking at the various displays, an overweight man in a semi-sheer wedding dress offered him some cookies. Not being stupid, Gurgak said, "No thanks." But for some reason, his response made the man very upset. So the man picked him up and threw him over his shoulder. He began to carry Gurgak out of the building, but he bit the man really hard on the arm. After the man let him go, Gurgak ran to a cop who helped him find his dad.
When Snoopy was in elementary school, nobody was allowed to bring their own pair of shoes. It had to be the school's custom shoes. The shoes cost $45.99, and they hiked up the price for the holidays. If anyone did wear their own shoes, they were sent to the principal's office to be written up for disobedience, disrespecting the American flag, and offending the teachers. If people continued wearing their own shoes, punishment would eventually escalate to the point where people could be taken to the police station.
The craziest thing Hellbent's ex ever did was when they shared an apartment. At first, everything was going great. One night though, she became crazy and started to throw a fit. Hellbent asked her what was wrong, but she became quiet and walked into the kitchen. She opened the pantry door and, without warning, threw a hatchet at him. Hellbent froze in terror as he watched the hatchet miss his face by inches. Then, his ex ran into the bathroom and drew a pentagram on the wall using hair color. Looking back, Hellbent couldn't believe how much of a psycho she was.
Salty Squid was out looking for toads, frogs, and newts in his hometown. He went to his usual hot spots when he came across a fallen fence.
Yeah, who am I kidding? It's not connected to anything, it just fell over.
He told himself as he moved it out of the way. Later that night, a guy pulled him over and scolded him for moving the fallen fence, asking, "What were you doing moving the fence?" Salty Squid answered,
Well, it had fallen over. Can I go now?
The man said, "If you move, I'm gonna call the cops." Salty Squid thought
Oh, fuck that.
and drove away. The man actually did call the police, who pulled him over and arrested him. Even though the fence had already fallen over, it was connected to a field. He had to spend the rest of the year in jail.
The worst advice Scooby ever gave to her sister, Snoopy, was that if she knocked out all her teeth, then the Tooth Fairy would give her money plus a really special reward. So, in the middle of the night, Snoopy decided to pull out almost all of her teeth. She pulled out 3 before their mom came in the room asking, "What the hell are you doing?" Snoopy told her what Gooby had told her, and their mom punished Gooby with no tablet and no TV for 2 months. It turned out that someone at school told Gooby that lie, and she was even planning on pulling out all her teeth that same night. That was when her mom told her the secret about the Tooth Fairy, making Gooby sob for 2 hours. Can we please get an F in the chat, boy? One night, Andy Mations got invited to a college pool party. It was going really well until Andy's drunk friend Sid got a terrible idea. He decided to take the parasol from the poolside table, climb onto the second-story balcony, and jump off. He thought the parasol would cause him to float gently into the pool, but it didn't work out that way. Instead, the big parasol swung him around and made him do a complete 360. Sid panicked and let go, causing him to plummet into the concrete below. Luckily, he survived, but his arm and shoulder were broken in several places.
There's nothing Honeybit's dad loves more than to get lost in a good book, but he also has this habit that makes his family scratch their heads. You see, he likes buying books from the dollar store, but then he rips each individual page out after he's finished reading them. At the end of the story, his books are nothing but front and back covers with a couple of pages in between. Honeybits hates that he does this because it means no one else can read his books when he's done.
Honeybits had an evil uncle when she was 14. One night, she was left home alone, sitting on the living room couch when her dog sat up. It let out a low growl as Honeybits heard what seemed to be a footstep on the back porch. She turned off the TV and got on the floor to hide from whoever might be outside. She crawled to the window and peeked through the blinds. The moon outlined the hulking figure of a man who had a large hunting knife gripped in his hand. He gave her a dead stare. She could just make out his face enough to know that it was her aunt's ex-husband, and he was grinning like a man possessed. Quickly, she pulled back from the window and laid flat on the floor. "I know you're in there, you little bitch," he teased. At the sound of his voice, Honeybit's dog went crazy and barked and lunged at the window. She decided to run to her parents' bedroom. Suddenly, her ex-uncle rammed the back door with his shoulder. Honeybits was just barely able to get her hands on her father's 9mm when she heard the door give way. Backed into the corner of her parents' bedroom, she heard him yell as the dog tore into him. She heard the solid thud of him kicking the dog, then the footsteps came up the hall. Her uncle screamed that he was gonna slit her scrawny little throat. Then there was a deafening blow to the door. She took aim. Then with another loud blow, the door flew open. She shot her ex-uncle 7 times, but he didn't die. There were 4 blossoms of blood forming on his back and 3 new holes in the bedroom wall. Moments later, Honeybits heard sirens and saw flashing lights. The police entered her house, having been called by the neighbors. Her uncle's limp body was handcuffed and taken away in an ambulance.
Once, when Melissa was at school, she was sitting in the playground when out of nowhere, a random drunk guy appeared. He was holding a guitar case, and it looked like he was going to get something out of the case when, all of a sudden, his pants fell down, exposing his naked schlong. The bell rang, and Melissa went back to class laughing. The next day, the man appeared on the front page of the local newspaper. He had passed out on the school lawn, and his guitar case contained a machete and a gun. Who knows what could have happened to Melissa and her friends if his pants hadn't fallen down?
The worst way Dolan was romantically rejected was in 8th grade. It was the day before Valentine's Day, and he was about to go ask out the hottest girl in school. It was lunchtime, and he went to ask her out, but saw 5 other boys asking her out as well. Dolan was nervous, but he still asked her out. She said,
"Yeah, sure, why not?"
Dolan's big brother had a party that day, and she was there. Dolan asked her to go in the basement while he got punch. She agreed, but when he came back, all the boys who had asked her out before were making out with her. She looked at Dolan and said,
"Oh, never mind, I'm over."
Dolan kicked everyone out and stayed home crying.
In school, Dolan and his group were working on a project. Almost everyone in the group worked very hard, except for one person who decided to talk to the other classmates. Since his phone wasn't working, Dolan asked the guy, "Could you send an email with your Gmail account?" The guy said, "I don't have a Gmail account. I only have a Google Mail account." Everyone in Dolan's group laughed their heads off, with the guy staring at them in confusion.
Sidious was up late one night doing work on his laptop when he heard something at his bedroom window. He went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife and crept back to his window to find a hooded figure climbing into his room. He panicked and threw the knife straight at the person and then hid in a different room. A few minutes later, there was a complete silence, so he walked back to his room and found the knife sitting in a pool of blood, but no one was to be found. He called 911, and the police told Sidious they couldn't find any trace of an intruder apart from the blood. He didn't get much sleep that night.
There was one teacher that Dolan had who did a lot of amazing things for his students. But one time in particular, he saw that all of his game designer students were feeling under the weather. So he had the class pass around several USBs. All of these contained Unreal Tournament 3, and after every computer was finished downloading the game, Dolan and his classmates spent the rest of the class laughing and playfully shouting at each other while playing together. After that day, every time the class's morale was low, Dolan's teacher would triumphantly stand up and say, "You all have 5 minutes to finish working and save your progress. We're playing video games today." Sadly, due to how strict and old-fashioned the high school was, he ended up quitting. Dolan's teacher treated his students as actual people with actual lives outside of school, and he had a massive success rate for his classes.
Mikhailum used to work at an open farm caring for goats and chickens. The goats were his main focus, but Mikhailum often had to keep an eye out for chicken eggs. Because the chickens were free roaming, they would often lay eggs on the goat's hay rack. When Mikhailum came out of one of the goat houses with a few chicken eggs, he found a woman and her son watching him. The kid asked,
"Are those goat eggs?"
Mikhailum just said,
No, goat eggs are purple and made of chocolate.
When Gooby was 8 years old, she heard a noise in her kitchen at 2 a.m. one morning. She then heard a strange whisper, so she grabbed her cat and decided to check it out. In the middle of her kitchen, she could see all the cabinets were open and a black figure standing there, looking at her. She froze with fear and just stared back while her cat hissed and ran away. She stepped back slowly, then ran back to her bedroom. When she returned to the kitchen the next morning, all the cabinets were open, but the black figure wasn't there.
Gooby's senior year of high school, her final was coming up, and she knew she wasn't going to pass. Luckily for Gooby, her teacher gave out a practice test that had a bit of the answers from the exam, so she decided to Google all of the answers. 3 days before the exam, Gooby wrapped gauze around her arm to make it look like she messed it up, and so it wouldn't look weird having gauze around her arm right on the day of the test. That day, she sat in her truck, writing down all of the questions and answers on her arm, and wrapped gauze around it again. When she took the finals, Gooby pulled back the gauze to look at the answers, and if her teacher ever looked up, she would just rub her arm to make it look like it was irritated. She didn't get caught and passed the test with an 86.
I'm going to tell you about the worst way a lover has ever proposed to me. In grade 7, Pokemon was still a thing for me. There was a guy named Ryan who was a little on the weird side, let's say. He was a bit of a misfit, and because I felt bad for him, I tried to talk to him, make him feel welcome. And then one day, he brought me a stuffed Pikachu. I thought it was a cute gesture, because who doesn't love Pokemon? But then, he told me that I had to cut it open to see what was inside. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when you're in grade 7 and you get a cute little stuffed animal, cutting it open and severing its head is not necessarily something you want to do. Anyway, he told me that I needed to do it, and then when I refused, he decided to cut it open himself. He pulls out a scissors from his pocket, takes it out, and out drops a ring pop. He picks it up from the ground and holds it in his hand, looks me in the eyes, and asks me to be his girlfriend. Of course I said hell no! How could you just kill Pikachu? You evil person, and I walked away, as I should have.
When Tolop was 6 years old, he was bouncing around in the kitchen, climbing on the benches, doing usual kid things. He climbed a little too far and ended up smashing the kettle on the ground. His parents were furious at him and came up with a strange way to punish him for being so careless. For his punishment, they made him fill a jug of water and walk around the house, offering it to anyone who might be thirsty. He had to stand for 3 hours as some sort of 6-year-old butler, offering drinks to his family members.
When Slaptan was 4 years old, he refused to sleep in his own room, so he'd go and sleep in his brother's room. He was quite attached to his brother and followed him everywhere, so one day his brother went to use the bathroom and he followed him, watching as he went to take a piss. He walked up to his brother with a confused look on his face and said to him,
"Don't piss in Mr. Toilet."
He then walked out. His brother was shocked and pretty much speechless for the rest of the day.
When Doopy was in high school, her friend's parents showed up to her school to put on a cowboy theater show. It was just those two in the show, and the whole school had to watch. They both dressed like cowboy characters and sang a bunch of the corniest, most juvenile cowboy songs ever in front of all the students and all the teachers. The kids were silent the entire time. Doopy could see preschoolers being entertained by the show, but she just couldn't understand why someone thought it was a good idea for high school students. She was just glad it wasn't her parents.
One day, when Pringle was on his lunch break at school, he noticed a fight had broken out between a group of students near him. Suddenly, another group of students started fighting each other, then another, and another. He looked around him and noticed there were 6 different fights happening all at the same time. He started backing away and luckily he narrowly avoided a fist flying at his face. Half of the school's teachers were involved, trying to break up the violence. When it was finally time to go back to class, almost every student had a black eye or an ice pack on their heads. He never did find out what the hell was going on.
Robo's former chemistry teacher was a really cool guy. One of his best moments came during one fateful lesson when they were using Bunsen burners. All was going smoothly until a boy started screaming. Robo looked in his direction and saw that his hair had caught on fire. Nobody around him knew what to do, so the teacher, he jumped up, down from the table he was standing on, ran across the room to the panicked boy, and pulled him into a bear hug to smother the fire. The boy sustained some burns to his face, and his hair looked really weird for a while, but he would have suffered a lot worse if the teacher hadn't have been there to help. When she was 16, Honeybits worked at Walmart. It went all right for the first couple of weeks until one day when her boss pulled her aside. Confused, she asked him why he wanted her. He told her to be quiet and to not ask any questions. That scared her. He brought her into his office and told her to sit down. Her boss proceeded to tell Honeybits that his girlfriend broke up with him and that he missed her every night. Shocked and thinking he wanted her to be his ex-girlfriend's replacement, Honeybits yelled and jumped out of the chair, but her boss grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. He continued to explain that he didn't want her that way, but instead told her to bring the female customers into his office so that he could have sex with them. Terrified, Honeybits nodded and then left. She then pulled out her phone and called the police.
When Ladybot was in the 4th grade, she saw 2 kids get into a fight about crayons. At first, they were pushing each other and snatching crayons from each other's hands. But then one kid took it about 10 levels too far and started strangling the other kid to death. The teacher had stepped out of the room for a few minutes, so the other kids in the class were encouraging them, yelling, "Fight, fight, fight." By the time the teacher returned, the strangled kid's face had turned purple. 2 4th graders murdering each other over crayons is still the most hardcore thing Ladybot has ever seen.
Melissa tried to start a conversation with the new girl at school. She was from the south, so Melissa, trying to be considerate, said,
"Howdy, madam,"
like she was a cowboy or a country singer. The girl didn't appreciate it. She told the principal, and Melissa got suspended for making fun of a student.
Nixium's deepest, darkest secret is from when he was a child. Whenever he was bored, he used to pick his nose and have competitions with the snot in each nostril. First, he would judge each nostril's boogies based on their size, and then, finally, he would flick them both and see which one went the furthest. Every child picked their nose, but Nixium brought in the element of competition. As he got older, he thankfully found better, less disgusting hobbies.
When Spinal Palm was 10 years old, it was extremely ball-dripping hot, and so he took off all of his clothes and started to watch YouTube. His dad shouted for him to practice guitar, but Spinal Palm's door was closed, so his dad didn't hear him start playing. 5 minutes later, his dad came up to the room to see if he was practicing, and what he saw was Spinal Palm, totally naked, playing his guitar. "What are you doing?" his dad shouted. Spinal Palm screamed back,
"I was hot, what are you doing?"
His dad tried not to look at him, and he just walked out of the room.
Nixium was younger. He really liked hot sauce. Nobody knew this, but he would wake up at 2 a.m. to sneak into the kitchen at night to drink hot sauce. It became such a habit that he would keep a bottle under his pillow for him to drink at night. His mum noticed how quickly the hot sauce would run out and yelled at his dad for using too much sauce in his pasta. His mum had to start buying 3 bottles every week or so, thinking his dad was the hot sauce culprit. Little did she know Nixium was drinking it straight from the bottle in his room every night.
I'm gonna tell you about something I regret doing. Once my friend and his girlfriend wanted to test out their taser. They said they would give $20 to anybody who could take the taser for more than 10 seconds. I lasted a little over 10 seconds, got the money, which didn't go far. My girlfriend thought I was a moron, and I lost a little bit of respect from everybody in that room. I also have a dumb scar on my left arm that I have to frequently explain to doctors. If I could turn back time, I would have just stayed seated and ignored the bet. One summer, when Melissa was 15, she was sitting on a park bench when she heard an old man singing the Justin Bieber song, Baby. It didn't take long for her to see the drunk, homeless, 60-year-old man walking down the path singing the song. He was holding a beer bottle, so she could tell he was drinking. Then he stopped, looked at her, stuck his middle finger up and said, "Fuck you!" Melissa didn't really care until he pulled down his pants and started trying to pull it out. She screamed and told him to stop, but he wouldn't. She panicked and ended up knocking him out to stop him. Melissa called 911 and ran for it. The weirdest thing is she saw the same guy a year later wearing a suit and tie.
If anything, I was the weird one in my family. I remember I went through this phase in my life where I hated odd numbers, and when my parents would turn the volume up or down on the TV, if it were on an odd number, it would make me very upset. I finally forced myself out of the weird habit just by exposure to it. That, and I like ketchup on my green beans, which is also weird, I guess.
It's the weirdest thing I've ever heard on public transport. Well, actually, Gooby and I both heard this one. We were just kind of sitting around minding our business on the train, and this guy comes on the train, and he's just repeating the same thing over and over, the one word. He keeps saying 1994, and he laughs every time he says it. He's like, 1994, and he just does this over and over. We were on the train for about half an hour, and not once did he let up. He just kept going. By the end, Gooby and I were actually theorizing about what could possibly have taken place in 1994 that was so funny. I got out my phone and I started looking up the things that happened, you know. I was like, actually, Final Fantasy VI came out. Maybe he's laughing about that. And I guess that's the year the Lion King came out and The Mask. I don't think he's laughing about Pulp Fiction. So Gooby and I were just going back and forth about all the possibilities. What could it possibly be that was so funny? We never did figure it out. Guys, comment below if there's something that happened in 1994 I'm not thinking about that would be so funny we'd want to repeat the year over and over on a train while laughing crazily. Maybe I'm just missing something really obvious.